And now if we look at stance set 1, and we look at how the twist stance is being taught in stance set 1, it really gives you a little bit of a clue on how to introduce it to a student and in what order you would have him practice it. What I mean by that is, if you look at the first half of stance set 1, we're having the student get into a twist stance by doing a rear crossover, right? And then the student unwinds after that. But that is easier than what we are asking the student to do in the second half of the set. Because now, after you did your forward bow, reverse bow part in the stance set, you have to go and pivot into a twist stance, all right? That's hard. A lot of students will mess that one up. A lot of students have difficulty getting the dimensions of your stance just right when you're either in a neutral bow stance or reverse bow, it doesn't really matter, or in a forward bow stance, and you from there have to pivot your front foot and pivot into a twist stance. That is more difficult, and that's why it's in the second half of stance set rather than in the first half. So if you're breaking this down to drills, that's something to be aware of. And here now we have a self-defense technique that is from 3rd degree brown belt, and it's against the right front kick, roundhouse kick combination, right? And we're now pivoting into the twist stance, and we're going to use that in order to drive our left strike with our left hand. But we're also going to pivot back out of the twist stance, and we're going to use that also to drive our right arm, the front arm in this case, right? And it also helps us continue moving. We're going to use residual force and go right into a back heel kick because we're already rotating, right? We're just going to continue to rotate, and we're going to take advantage of that. Okay? And then if we look at this two-man technique, it means two attackers attacking us, right? One attacking us with a left step to punch, and then we have a second attacker coming from behind us. Here we're back to doing a crossover to get to the twist stance, but once we are in it, we're going to nevertheless unwind. And it's similar to the 3rd degree brown belt technique we just looked at a moment ago. We're going to unwind, and we're going to use that in order to, again, generate force and depth of penetration and proper positioning for our front arm. But we're also going to use it to, again, we're going to use the residual force, and we're going to turn this now into a spinning back kick rather than just a front leg kick, so we can see how either leg can benefit from pivoting back into a neutral bow stance. In this case, we're pivoting back into a transitory neutral bow stance because we want to keep rotating and go right into that spinning back heel kick. But you see how either the front leg or the back leg could take advantage of the unwinding from a twist stance back to either a neutral bow position or something similar to that. And if you use a rear crossover, it doesn't really matter if you're going to continue right out of that rear crossover or if you're going to settle into a twist stance for a moment. On the rear crossover, you have something somewhat unique happening here because there's such a great shift laterally. In other words, when you're stepping, if you look right here, you're going to use a rear crossover, and this brings us to the right. It moves our whole body to the right laterally, dramatically, all right? A whole lot. So now we have this stance change is moving us forward, but it's also moving us towards the right, and is making us drop in height. And we can take advantage of that. And if we look at this self-defense technique right here against a right cross push, this is on orange belt. This is an excellent example. This is actually the first move of the extension. And we're going to do a rear crossover here. Right? And now look at how that benefits our hands, how the arms can take advantage of that. It's quite unique because the left arm in this case benefits not only from, of course, the forward motion, right, getting closer to the target. It benefits dramatically from the lateral motion. The fact that we're moving our body to the right, if we now do a left inward heel palm or heel palm claw, well, it's going to benefit from that lateral motion, right? By moving your body across, your hand can move across a lot, right? But if you look at the other arm, your right arm, it's executing a heel palm to the solar plexus here, right? It benefits more from the drop in height because this strike is downward. Right? It is also moving across, it is moving left to right, so it benefits from the drop in height as well as the lateral movement, as well as the forward motion, right? But we can see how each hand benefits from this foot maneuver and the change in dimension, right? The left hand, in this case, benefiting more from the change in width, or the lateral change, right? And the right hand, in this case, benefiting more from the drop in height. Both strikes benefit from the forward motion basically equally. Right, that forward momentum that's being added, it's about in both strikes will take advantage of that. All right, now there's one more stance I want to talk about, even though there's more than one stance left in the Kenpo system. We have a lot more stances, but most of them are derivatives of the stances we already talked about, right? But you know, we're going to in other videos talk about things such as the horse stance or the fighting horse stance, for example, or the reverse close kneel, the reverse wide kneel, the one-legged stance, the reverse cat stance, the diamond stance, the concave stance, and I don't know if I'm forgetting any right now. But right now, we're going to just talk about the reverse bow, because the reverse bow stance is an essential stance in the Kenpo system and you use it a lot. So to find the proper dimensions of a reverse bow, you basically take a forward bow and you turn it around. Alright? So it's just like it was with the twist stance. The difference between the forward bow and the reverse bow essentially is the line of sight. And of course that means now we have a 40-60 weight distribution, front foot 40, rear foot 60, because what was our back foot a moment ago in a forward bow has now become our front foot, right? So if we look at this, one of the first things we notice is that the reverse bow actually can increase the distance between us and our opponent, particularly the distance of our upper body. And that can be very, very useful because first of all, it can protect you, but more importantly, the way we use it in a lot of our techniques is that it can give you a better position from which you can execute one additional strike now, right? So oftentimes we will conclude a strike sequence in a reverse bow because it allows us to do, particularly this strike to the groin right here, right? It doesn't matter if it's a palm strike or a hammer fist, but the fact is, by turning it to the reverse bow, we're essentially creating a new point of origin with our right shoulder, right? We're creating a new starting position for our right arm. We're pivoting our body, and that's kind of half the work that our arm needs in order to get repositioned for this last strike. If we did not turn to the reverse bow, we wouldn't have the strike available, right? So by this rapid change in position, we simply get access to angles that we didn't have otherwise. And we can turn so quickly that it's very, very practical to have this added to your arsenal of movement. Now there are other factors that make this a very practical move, like borrowing force, for example, or path of least resistance. And we're going to discuss that in another lesson. That's not to talk about right now, but it's nevertheless, it exists right here. That's kind of good to be aware of. Right? But it's again really, really good to take a look at how the shoulders rotate, particularly when you go from a neutral bow stance to a reverse bow stance. Right? But there's upper body rotation again, and we can take advantage of that, just like we did with the forward bow stance earlier, right? But now it's going to be different now, right? So let's take a look at this self-defense technique right here on orange belt. That's against the right cross push, right? But this is the first technique in the Kenpo system that employs a reverse bow stance. And so let's take a look at why we're doing that, right? And in order to understand that, we have to look at the fact that this technique is against a push, and we are pinning our opponent's right arm. And we are going to attempt to break his elbow, or at least injure his elbow, right? Well, now let's compare two different scenarios here, because I think that's going to really make it easier to understand why we're using, or why Mr. Parker writes this with a reverse bow stance, right? So, because you could make this, or you could attempt to make this work just stepping into a regular neutral bow stance, right? And in this technique, we have to note that we're going along with our opponent. In other words, we're not blocking his push. We're allowing him to move our right shoulder back. And we're going to actually ride that force, so to speak. We're going to pin his hand. We're going to use that rotation that he is causing, and we're going to use it against him, right? So the more he rotates us, and the harder he pushes, the more we can then take advantage of that rotation, and we can strike with our left arm quite forcefully, right, with our left forearm strike, because we're turning, we're rotating, right? But if we do it in a neutral bow stance, what we get is we have, let's look at it from sort of a bird's eye view here. Our opponent's right shoulder is basically a fixed point, right? If our opponent is in front of us, we have his arm, and we pin his shoulder, we pin his hand to our shoulder. So now we have two fixed points, right? We pin his hand, so his forearm isn't going to go anywhere. We have his shoulder as a fixed point, so we can now take our left arm and strike the elbow. And that would work. That would work. You can do it like that. Because you have two fixed points. You have his arm basically stabilized, and he's not going anywhere. And you can now attempt to strike to the elbow, right? But now let's compare that to the way it's supposed to be done, which is using a reverse bow. And you notice now that what was a fixed point a moment ago, which is our pin against our opponent's right hand or right wrist, That's no longer a fixed point now. Right? Look at how this rotates, right? First of all, you get greater depth of penetration with your left arm because you're turning clockwise in this case, right? But you also get a leveraging action, right? Your right pin is no longer stationary. It is now essentially acting as a lever because your right shoulder is moving back now, right? And you get now greater depth of penetration. You get greater speed because you have both of these actions simultaneously complementing each other at the same time, right? And you get greater force as a result of that, right? Because now you have both the fulcrum point where you're basically trying to break because you created a lever with between your left arm and your right arm, right? You have that fulcrum point being able to contribute more to the action, but you also have your right arm basically changing your opponent's hand's location. When we did this in the neutral bow, we left that location alone. We allowed your opponent to keep his right hand where it was. Now in the reverse bow, we don't. We pull that right hand back dramatically, and it's simply a move that requires a whole lot less force in order to be able to still execute that same break. And we're not just adding the motion, we're adding backup mass. And otherwise, by rotating, we also are engaging the weight of our body to help with the leveraging action on the break and to help with the fulcrum, breaking action of our left arm. And then let's look at one more example of how the reverse bow, the stance change from a neutral bow to a reverse bow can be very beneficial for our hand strikes. And let's go to another orange belt technique. This is against the right roundhouse punch. But now we're going to go to the extension of this technique. It's basically towards the end of the extension. We have here, after we execute a palm strike to our opponent's chin, we are now going to reverse the motion of our left hand. Right? We're going to do an eye hook with our left, coming back, and we're going to at the same time execute a right hand sword moving forward with our right. We started this in the neutral bow stance, and as we are doing these two motions with our hands, we're pivoting into a reverse bow stance. And you can see again, very similar to what we talked about so far, we have the body rotation complement our hands. Our left shoulder moves back, and that helps with a hook to the eye. Our right shoulder moves forward, and that helps with the extension of the right hand sword. Right. But no explanation of the reverse bow stance in Kenpo would be complete without this next one, because it's so characteristic of our art, and that is the rear crossover into a buckle in a reverse bow. This one is common. We have this as early as blue belt, where we're executing this kind of a buckle, and it's also there stemming out of a rear crossover type of a maneuver. Right? But this one it allows us now to use the reverse bow, similarly to what we did before, have that strike to go with it, but it flows right out of this rear crossover maneuver, and it's so easy to execute this buckle, right? And it's so difficult for your opponent to block it. It is so difficult for your opponent to even see it coming. Right? This is in a very obscure angle. It's difficult for your opponent to notice that you're about to turn to a reverse bow. And it's extremely effective. Look at the position that leaves your opponent in. And another reason why this is a very common use of the reverse bow stance is because not only are we getting all the benefits of the reverse bow that we already talked about, but we're getting one additional one because we're moving towards our opponent with the reverse bow, so now we're getting forward momentum. Right? So our last hand strike here benefits from that. You are now moving towards your opponent, and you're going to get some body momentum together with this while you're executing the buckle. And you're still able to use your rear arm and check with it, so that way you're not open and walk into his any possible hand flailing or any attempts of him striking you back. Alright, so that's it for Kenpo Karate, more stances, stance changes, and strikes. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you like it. Thank you.